Art history has a really interesting habit of forgetting women. Not accidentally, not through some administrative oversight, but deliberately and systematically, scrubbing them out, crediting their work to men, leaving their names off the lists, out of the books, out of the conversation entirely. And nobody got erased harder than Artemisia Gentileschi. This was a woman who painted with the same brutal emotional intensity as Caravaggio, who was commissioned by kings and popes, who produced work so technically extraordinary that for centuries after her death, scholars assumed some of it must have been painted by her father, because surely a woman couldn't have made something that powerful. She was assaulted at 17, put on trial and tortured while her attacker walked free. And then she picked up a paintbrush and painted one of the most viscerally violent revenge fantasies in the history of Western art. Artemisia Gentileschi lived from 1593 to 1656, and the fact that most people have never heard her name is not an accident. It was a choice. And we're undoing it right now. Artemisia grew up in Rome surrounded by paint and canvas because her father, Orazio Gentileschi, was himself a respected painter and a close friend of Caravaggio. Yes, that Caravaggio. She was absorbing technique and theory from childhood, and by her early teens it was quietly obvious to everyone in that household that she was more talented than most of the adult men her father knew. In a different world that would have been celebrated. In early 17th century Rome it was complicated, because the art world was entirely male. The guilds that trained professional painters didn't accept women, and a girl who was too good too young made people uncomfortable in ways they couldn't quite articulate. When Artemisia was 17, her father hired a painter named Agostino Tassi to tutor her, to give her access to the formal training she couldn't get anywhere else. Tassi assaulted her, and when Orazio took Tassi to court, what followed was one of the most grotesque trials in art history. Artemisia was subjected to Sibille, a form of torture using metal rings tightened around the fingers, while she testified to verify that she was telling the truth. Her attacker was not tortured. He was eventually convicted, sentenced to a year in prison, and served none of it. Artemisia was the one who carried the damage out of that courtroom. She was 18 years old. Here is where the story shifts, because Artemisia Gentileschi did not collapse. She did not disappear quietly into a marriage and a domestic life and let the art world forget her name. She painted. And what she painted in the years following the trial tells you everything about where her head was at. Her most famous work is Judith slaying Holofernes, a biblical story about a woman who cuts off a general's head to save her people. Caravaggio had painted the same scene, and his version showed Judith looking vaguely uncomfortable, holding the sword at arm's length like she'd rather be somewhere else. Artemisia's version is completely different. Her Judith is focused, strong, and completely committed to what she's doing. There is no hesitation on her face. Art historians have spent decades noting that the face of the villain, the man being beheaded, bears a resemblance to Agostino Tassi. Artemisia never confirmed this. She didn't need to. The painting said it louder than any statement could. She went on to paint powerful, autonomous women over and over throughout her career. Susanna, Cleopatra, Mary Magdalene, Lucretia, always with a psychological depth and a physical honesty that was completely unlike anything her male contemporaries were producing. She moved to Florence, then Venice, then Naples, then London, building a reputation across Europe serious enough that King Charles I of England personally invited her to his court. She was the first woman admitted to the Accademia delle Arti del Disegno in Florence, one of the most prestigious art institutions in the world. She was, by any honest measure, one of the greatest painters of the Baroque era. Artemisia Gentileschi died around 1656. The exact date is unknown because by then the art world had already begun the process of forgetting her. Her paintings were gradually reattributed to her father, to unknown male artists, to studio of credits that erased her name from her own work. By the 19th century, she had almost completely vanished from the official record. A woman who was commissioned by royalty, who painted in 4 countries, who produced dozens of major works across a 40-year career, gone. It wasn't until the 1970s that art historians began seriously recovering her legacy, tracking down misattributed paintings, reinstating her name, rebuilding the career that 3 centuries of deliberate erasure had dismantled. Today, her work hangs in the Uffizi, the Met, the National Gallery. Judith slaying Holofernes is considered one of the defining masterpieces of the Baroque period. She is studied, celebrated, and finally properly credited. But it took 300 years. 300 years of her paintings hanging on museum walls with the wrong name underneath them. 300 years of a woman being erased from the legacy she built with her own hands, while the man who heard her was a historical footnote nobody remembers. The art survived. It always does. They just made sure you didn't know who made it. So here's the question I can't stop thinking about. How many Artemisia are still out there? How many painters, composers, writers, scientists had their work quietly handed to someone else? Their names quietly removed, their contributions quietly absorbed into someone else's legacy, because Artemisia only got recovered because enough people refused to let it go. Let me know in the comments who you think deserves to be recovered next, because I have a list and this series is going to get into all of it. Subscribe if you want to be here when we do, like the video if Artemisia just became one of your favorite people in history.